about an area that we haven't covered really. Was Liszt at all a prankster or a jokester? Was he a funny man at a party? What was he like in that respect?
I don't think that he was a prankster, although he was a good-humored man most of the time, and he liked cheap wine and cheap cigars, and that would keep him happy. Perhaps musically in his time they thought he was a prankster, for he was a far-out composer then. And, well, today is April's Fools, right?
Yeah.
Well, the work we're going to hear today, and for the next two programs we're going to listen to Liszt works for piano and orchestra, is our first work will be the first piano concerto, and that was dubbed the Triangle Concerto, and some critic by the name of Hanslick, who has come down to us as not only really a fine critic, but as an enemy of Wagner and Liszt, dubbed it, when it had its Vienna premiere, the Triangle Concerto. And how could anyone write triangles in a serious form like the piano concerto?
Well, wasn't it
perhaps
used...
we can tie in April Fool's Day with Liszt's use of the triangle. It was something that was very comic at first. Today we realize that once again Liszt was looking and searching for new uses in orchestral color, and this certainly is very workable in the concerto, and it's a charming effect, the triangle in the first piano concerto. Now, what was your question?
Well, whether the instrument had been used prior to that, and if so, did it have the sort of connotation, say, that the saxophone did for a long time, as far as classical music was concerned? Was it considered to be beneath dignity?
Right. The triangle was something not to use in something as serious as a concerto. But, however, the concerto's quality came through eventually, and it's been one of the most played piano concertos. Critics, people, still aren't sure if they like it because it's dun, 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 and then he transforms the whole work. I mean, this is one of Liszt's rhythmical transformation themes, where he, one critic called, well, in this case, the second concerto, the life and adventures of a theme. Now, Liszt really broke new ground formally in this work because it's so compact. And in the second concerto, it's actually one movement where he transforms his opening. And this was an important structural device for him and for other composers to follow.
How old was he when he wrote this?
Well, this concerto was premiered, I believe, in 1855, although the first theme came to him as early as 1830. And took many years to germinate into the final form, which happened frequently in Liszt's works. Now, this was performed with Liszt at the piano, mind you. Okay, that's a nice sight.
Mm-hmm.
Something we have never seen, and never will. And guess who conducting the world premiere?
Well, now that you make me wonder, it would have been, well, I doubt if it had been Chopin. It might have been Wagner?
In 1855, Chopin was dead.
Oh, that's right, yeah, 55.
And Wagner was a political exile. No, it was his great friend from the early Paris days and one of the great influences on his life, Berlioz. Berlioz came to Weimar, and there occurred the premiere. Think of it! Can you imagine a world premiere with Liszt at the piano? Now age 44, and Berlioz age 52, I believe, 1803.
Both legends, of course.
Legends already in their own time as two of the most romantic creatures of the 19th century. Berlioz with his flaming red hair, his wild, almost opium look, and he did take opium in his last years, and Liszt with this long, thick mane, still magnificently handsome, slender, tall, a little sardonic looking, and Berlioz conducting the orchestra that Liszt actually invented for himself at Weimar.
Of course, those two people on the stage would have been remarkable in themselves, but I'm sure they would have drawn an audience unlike any other. What sort of audience was that? That must have been the occasion of the decade?
No, I think it was during one of the weeks that had a Berlioz festival that Liszt was putting on, and it was basically an aristocratic audience, and they probably came from many other small towns in Germany. Yes, it was an event.
I can imagine. It's a pity recordings hadn't been invented then. You know.
I would like to own the performance of Berlioz conducting with Liszt at the piano. Wow. Well, let's not dream. We do have a performance by Leonard Bernstein, a modern hero of music, and the soloist is a man that made his debut in this concerto on television with Bernstein conducting. I think the lad was 16 years old, and it was very elegant pianism, and his name is now famous. It's Andre Watts, and let's hear the New York Philharmonic Andre Watts soloist Leonard Bernstein conducting in Liszt's Piano Concerto No. 1 in E-flat major. Liszt's Piano Concerto in E flat. There is no opus number. There are no opus numbers in all of Liszt's work. Andre Watts, the pianist, and Leonard Bernstein conducting. We'll be back shortly.
I wonder whether two concertos by Liszt are too much for one program, since we're faced now with the second one.
Well, we have had concerts with two Liszt concerto performances. In fact, it's not uncommon, since both works are not long for concertos at all. The first Liszt is 18.5 minutes or around there, and we have a new recording of the Liszt number 2. Also number 1 is on the recording, and by György Cifra, the Hungarian pianist. And the Orchestra of Paris is the orchestra with Cifra's son, György Cifra Jr., conducting.
That must be an odd combination in music. Did we have very many father and son combinations?
Shostakovich and his son Maxim.
Maxim, yeah. And the Mozarts, of course, I suppose.
Siegfried Wagner was a conductor and an opera composer, but no, I don't know of many offhand.
That should be an interesting recording. I wonder if they approached the music exactly the same way. I wonder whether this was an immediate feeling of rapport, or whether there was this rebellion of the young against the old, whether Cifra's son had a different architectural view of the work than his father did, say, for example.
Oh, I don't think so. I think a good concerto performance must have the pianist giving the conception. You can bet that Cifra is the one making the conception here. However, when a young pianist is playing a concerto with a renowned conductor, he might be in trouble. But however, the best concerto performances always come from the soloist's conception. After all, the orchestra is supposed to accompany the pianist.
I noticed one interesting thing in comparing this recording to the Andre Watts, and maybe you can answer this. How come the Cifra version only runs about 22 minutes, and if I'm reading the timing correctly, the other runs 23 minutes? I see, they're timed incorrectly, yeah.
No, Andre Watts is doing the first concerto only on this. What we're discussing is number 2 here. Cifra does both.
I see.
Okay. Now, the second concerto is like the first in the sense that it's cyclic in form, but it doesn't have the movement differentiation at all, and it's an amazingly poetic work. It's more poetic than number 1. It's not as popular. There is one moment where all of a sudden you think it might be the Tchaikovsky concerto, and probably Tchaikovsky had heard the work. It's the vulgarest moment in the work. However, it survived because it's beautifully composed for the combination of piano and orchestra. Now, Liszt thought of the concerto as the piano as hero, and it should be a brilliant, clear-cut work, and I think that he has succeeded in number 2. In the concerto number 2 for piano and orchestra in the key of A major. The Orchestra of Paris, conducted by Georgi Tsifra Jr. and Georgi Tsifra Sr., piano soloist in the Liszt Piano Concerto No. 2 in A major. Join me tomorrow when we hear other Liszt works for piano and orchestra, including the greatly original Totentanz and the Hungarian Fantasia.
You've been listening to a musical offering with WNCN's music and program director David Dubal.